So I'm going to attempt to record this little audiobook, and what I'll be reading is Griz, written by me, Nick Sutter, and the part I'll be reading is Volume 1. Volume 1, Hero in Tainted Clothing. In a realm where all manner of evil reigns, a child is born, destined to save the tainted. This child, Griz the Unholy, lost his parents at a very young age. He was raised at different intervals of his life by wolf packs, cat prides, and human camps. Griz's life was not a normal one. For 9 more years, Griz lived in relative peace. He was originally nameless, but earned the name Griz when he saved a human village from a giant bear. It was the strangest thing, watching a child take down a bear, but it was also a grand sight. At the age of 10, when he could think for himself, Griz ran to the nearest town and pledged himself to a master of dark magic. The lessons were complicated and gruesome, but nothing the young Griz could not handle. Sadly, this apprenticeship did not last long. One evening, while teaching Griz about opening portals, the master was attacked and killed by one of his own demons. The demon turned on Griz, smiled mercilessly, and possessed him. Griz spent the next 20 years of his life as a puppet to this demon. Before his very eyes, he watched families die, cities burn, and his sanity fail. All seemed lost for Griz until light came. When light came, he covered Griz, warmed him, and greeted him as his child. Light had a face, but Griz could not bear to look at it. Grief, worry, horror, and sickness filled him. Light said, "Be still, my child, and let me save you, for you are destined to save the tainted." Griz was still, and he was saved. He awoke after years of torment in the presence of Light in his old, worn-down shack. He looked sadly down at the ground, and, without knowing it, asked for Light to forgive him. Light granted him forgiveness, and warned, "The guards have tracked you down to this shack. You should be prepared to surrender." Griz accepted his fate, and asked, "Light, can you guide me? Even while I am in the guard's custody, I need you to guide me down the right path." Light agreed and faded from view, but Griz knew he was still there. The next day, the guards burst through Griz's door, and demanded that he surrender that instant. Griz obeyed, surprising the guards, and was dragged to the dungeons of the nearest city. This city, which was the largest on the smallest continent of this realm, was highly respected for the capture and imprisonment of Griz the Unholy. Most of the people in the town wanted Griz hanged. The governor of the city, Frater, truly considered the proposal. However, having grown up visiting the village Griz was occasionally seen in, Frater denied everyone the pleasure of seeing him hang. Griz ended up living far longer than Frater. Griz's sentence for all of the crimes he had committed was meant to last a lifetime. Griz, punished with immortality for his sin, spent over 200 years in prison. Over that time, Light showed Griz the correct way to live his life. Griz was sometimes called crazy behind his back by the guards, for when he could not sleep at night, he talked to Light aloud, even though the guards could not hear him. Finally, at the age of 276, Griz was released. The guards, after thanking him for serving his time, and not fighting them, offered him a mirror and a dagger. Griz asked what they were for. "To shave that beard," the short guard told him in a gruff and heavy voice. This guard, obviously a dwarf, had apologized to him several times before for having to spend as long as he did behind bars. Griz went under a torch and looked at his reflection. It was like he was looking at a whole new face, but his hair was the same shade of red, his skin still umber, and his eyes had the same tired look to them. Griz slowly started shaving down most of his long beard. After he had finished, he admired his short beard and medium-length hair, liking how different he looked from his old self. He gave the guard the dagger and mirror and stepped outside, blinded momentarily by the sunlight. Griz looked up in awe at the beautiful city that lay before him. He looked beyond the center citadel and gazed into the blue sky. The sky, depending on your position on the planet, was any one of several different colors based on the waters. Most lands of water were blue or green, but yellow and pink waters were just as common. The world was open to Griz now, after more than 200 years. He could go anywhere and do anything. The first thing he wanted was a drink and some food, but he remembered that he had no money with which to buy anything. He wondered where he could get some money for himself. He turned, looking around the market region, and saw a help wanted sign in the nearest merchant's window. He walked into the store and got his first job. It was low at first, but after working in merchant Seolea's shop for a few weeks, Griz had earned about 300 bronze coins. The first thing he did with his money was walk down to the tavern and buy a few drinks and some food for himself. While working, he had been given small meals for free from Seolea. In return for the meals, Griz worked hard and was always the open ear that Seolea needed. As he ate, Griz contemplated what he was going to do with the rest of his life. Light entered his mind and offered the idea of working with the guards of different cities or taking up adventuring. Griz thought Light's ideas were both good options, but decided to get a second opinion on the matter. As anyone who trusted their boss would do, Griz went and asked Seolea which profession he should consider. Adventuring would clearly be more profitable, Seolea said, but if you want to try and redeem yourself, you should definitely join the guard. Griz nodded, agreeing with her reason, and a few days later left Seolea's shop to join the guard. His first day on duty held no exciting results, but when he offered to take up the night shift as well, every little noise was someone trying to kill him. He caught several assassins and thieves on his first night. Nothing was going to take Griz down, and nothing was going to stop him. On Griz's first month of guard duty, he had already shifted his image in the town from the worst criminal in the universe to an upstanding and trustworthy guardsman. He spent most of his time in the lower quarter, greeting the people kindly and donating what little he had to the poor. Even the criminals had come to respect him. They disliked him for being such a good guardsman, but adored being treated equally. Griz thought, I am in much higher spirits. If I keep up the good work, I will be able to live a normal life. I can't wait to be normal, to be good. One night, however, something appeared that hindered his moral progress. The calm city night was replaced with a night of terror. Griz's head shot up and beheld the horrific beast in the sky. A dragon, larger than most of the stores and houses, stared down at the pitiful city, and breathed fire over all he saw. The night grew far less calm and filled with activity. Griz ran straight into the nearest house and cleared the family out, leading them to an underground tunnel he had built with magic. Any person Griz saw was pointed towards the tunnel. Griz flew up the street and, without considering the risk, ran headlong into a burning house, and ran out with 2 dogs and 10 orphans. He pointed the way to the tunnel and told them to take shelter there. Once he knew they were safe, Griz sprinted to the main part of the city. The town square was once a beautiful symbol of the great city's strength. Now it was nothing more than a pile of ash and molten rock. Fire was everywhere. All the people who had not made it to safety were dead, and all Griz saw was the enormous head of the dragon. The beast opened his maw, and, in an unfamiliar tongue, chanted a spell that would have torn apart the soul and body of a mortal. But it would have no effect on Griz. However, knowing that it would have no effect, knowing that it would not have any effect did not make him feel any better. The sun shone down upon the ruined city. Wolves walked over the wreckage, smelling out any bodies left unharmed. Griz burst out of the ash, stone, and fire, scaring away the wolves. He breathed in the fresh morning air, and began his search for the people he saved. All of the survivors were found 2 miles southeast of the city ruins in a small temporary camp. Heartbreak and loss clung to the camp like a disease. Several of the city's guards stood watch over their makeshift camp. Griz approached the camp and talked to the dwarven guard, who looked completely shaken over the business with the dragon. How did you find the tunnel? Griz asked him curiously. The guards you see here, the dwarf began, gesturing to the others, saw several of the townsfolk being led by you into those tunnels. We wanted to ensure their safety, so we went after them. Seolea, who had been walking by at that time, marveled at Griz's sudden appearance, blushing slightly. How did you get out alive? You weren't in the tunnel, Griz. Seolea walked over and looked Griz up and down. Her eyes suddenly turned cold, and she stopped blushing. How do we know you are not one of those shades in a clever disguise? A shade, a creature made out of almost pure darkness, did not truly exist. Only the paranoid and fans of the supernatural believed in them. The dwarf covered his helm in an embarrassed sort of way. Griz was used to Seolea's conspiracy theorist nature at this point, and yet could not help but agree with her for the most part. If a dragon exists, why could such creatures as shades and orcs not exist? Griz showed Seolea the scars he had received when Light removed his demon. The scars, large glowing red marks that swirled around on his right hand, burned bright and then faded. Seolea flinched and nodded, pleased with his proof. The dwarf turned, removed his helm, and was sick in the bush next to him. Griz covered the scars with his gauntlet. "Are the survivors willing to move?" Griz questioned the dwarf once he was done. "Possibly, but where would they go? The nearest real city is across the oceans." The dwarf wiped his mouth and returned his helmet to his head. Griz walked into the camp. Seolea and Arguaro, the dwarf, followed not far behind, trying to keep up with his large strides. Griz stopped in front of a large tent and looked in to see who owned it. A healer, from the church of a nearby peasant village, stood over the survivors who were hurt during the rush to escape, tending to their wounds. She smiled when she noticed Griz. "Well, I don't believe my eyes," the healer stated. "I've only heard what people have said about you, but I never really thought you had overcome your evil. Of course, with Sin's presence in our realm, how could I not have thought it?" Sin read the scrolls. He would have known that Griz the Unholy would soon be free of that demon. Griz looked at her in pure curiosity. Sin, the dragon god that was sometimes praised by necromancers and the undead, was not real in Griz's mind. The dragon he saw showed no signs of the power that Sin allegedly had, but Griz still felt a strong aura coming from the dragon. This aura emulated the persona of pure power and rage. Griz, pursuing the fact that this woman seemed to know about his demon, asked, "Who are you?" She smiled slyly and said, "I am Snow-Eye, sister to Rainhand and daughter of August the Elf." She removed her hood and revealed long, pointed ears and a blank white eye. "I was in the same room as your master when you pledged yourself to him. I am glad to see you know better now." Her eyes went right through him, as if they could look past the exterior body and see the mind, heart, and soul. Griz asked, "You may be part elf, but what else are you? You don't seem to have the same magic as elves I've heard of." "However true that may be, I can assure you that I am completely elven. I am sure the elves you heard of are the sort of elves held up to the level of gods." "That is not true. Have you heard of the book given to mortals from another world? The Book of Truth and Adventure? The Gallant Isles?" Griz's face went blank. He had heard of that book before, and never having read it, did not understand its correlation to elves. "It may not say much," Seolea went on, "but I was able to glean the true nature of its elves and compare it to ours. Both of our elves are truly just as magical as Morningstar, or Light as we call him, allow them to be. The strongest pure-blood elf is Cathelf Godric Purefeet, father of elven history. The strongest part elf is Kirael, whose clan name I forgot." Griz noticed that she was having trouble tending to an orphan's wound. He told her to stop and then removed his right gauntlet. He reached for his strength reserve and healed the orphan completely. The elf was slightly astonished. "Your magic isn't tainted?" Snow-Eye interrogated, staring at the freshly healed wound. Griz took a moment to answer, for his head swam lightly from the use of the spell. "My magic is not tainted. No part of me is. I have been free of my demon and all darkness for over 2 centuries. I wish I could have had a youth full of adventure and compassion, but because of my foolishness I have lost that. I'll never know true friendship, heartache, nor shall I know pain." Griz looked down his right hand. The mark glowed ominously, drinking in the words and wishes. Snow-Eye glared at the mark. "Have you tried healing it?" "Scars carved by magic or high powers cannot be healed." Griz and Arguaro answered in unison. They looked at each other in surprise. "Arguaro, how did you know that?" Griz interrogated, stroking his short beard in contemplation. Arguaro seemed to shrink under his gaze. The dwarf coughed and unsuccessfully tried to change the subject. Once he knew there was no use, Arguaro explained himself. "I used to be a scholar at Zyron University, the College of Magic. I was thrown out of the college when one of my experiments backfired and killed one of my colleagues. I walked for days into the forest, the death of my colleague plaguing me. I had read in one of those ancient tomes in Zyron that magical experiments can have everlasting effects. My experiment cursed me to remember my mistake, and had marked my companion with a pain that would never leave him. The pain grew within moments, and I guess he could not take it. He died the following hour." Griz patted the dwarf on the shoulder in a comforting fashion. Soon he turned to the elf and asked, "In which direction did the dragon fly from the city?" The elf smiled, knowing that he referred to her enhanced senses. She recounted the night before, explained where she was, and said that the dragon flew off to the far southeast. Griz sighed, knowing that to get to the dragon he would have to travel all that way. When he left to sleep for the night, Arguaro pulled Griz aside and asked him what his plan was. "I plan," Griz explained, "to get on the first ship to the nearest continent. I will then move on to the biggest city and warn them of the dragon. If they will not listen, then maybe Light will have a plan." "Light does have a plan," Arguaro said. "Put your trust in him, Griz." The dwarf went silent, and his eyes momentarily went blank. Griz was afraid the dwarf was going to keel over. Arguaro fell to the ground and said in a deeper, different voice, "Light and the sun, dark, together have the power to overcome the dragons. This realm is in extreme peril. Many realms have faced dragons, but only one dragon can compare to Sin. Kairitu, king in the dark, was stunning but malevolent. He and Sin could destroy both of our worlds. Beware, Griz, the unholy, for if you go on your quest alone, you will fail, and Sin will reign over the realm." Griz's horror at Arguaro's words could not be hidden. He turned to avoid meeting the eyes of the newly awoken Arguaro. Arguaro refocused and looked up into the night sky. He turned towards Griz and asked, "Is something the matter, Griz?" Griz shook his head and said, "I will take my leave and collect all of what I have for the trip. Would you, dwarf, be willing to join me tomorrow?" Arguaro rose from the ground and nodded his consent. They both departed, and the night grew slightly darker. As the night went on, Griz called upon Light and talked to them. "So," Light said, "your plan is to simply move on and inform the cities. However much that would help them, that will not help the rest of the realm. We need to have Sin destroyed." "But how, Light?" Griz asked. "If I am to take Arguaro at his word, only you and this dark man can destroy him." "Yes, Arguaro speaks true. But all three of us would make a far better match for Sin." Light stopped talking momentarily, and looked at Griz as if he had misheard him. "Arguaro mentioned Dark." Griz nodded, and asked, "Who is Dark?" "Dark is my son. I named him Dark because of his hair color and mature nature. I think the two of you would get along well." Light chuckled after pouring out some tea. Light continued, "I have not seen Dark in this part of the world for over a century. You, Arguaro, and I may just need to take a ship on the morrow." Griz nodded. "Shall I invite Snow-Eye? She may be useful." "Oh, she will be. But do not think of Snow-Eye as only a resource. I will not keep secrets from her, and she may just turn down your proposal if I tell her." As Griz turned out his lamp for the night, Light disappeared and left the room a little darker. The only light that shone was the moon, peering through the clouds. Everything was almost normal compared to the previous night. This night would prove just as eventful. The night holds many beastly things, as does the day in certain regions. On the small continent of Faroe, Griz was about to see just how beastly the night things were. Griz was abruptly awoken by the sound of growling. The growling clearly did not belong to that of a wolf. It was too deep and ragged. Griz turned to see a large shape standing on two legs like a man, and dripping with a murky green liquid. The thing rammed the wall of the tent and threw the fabric wall aside, revealing Griz and Light's sleeping place. Griz drew his sword, but it shattered against the thing's horrible hide as he struck the beast. The creature screeched at him, rising to its full height. It looked like a werewolf, but instead had a soggy green coat of a mixture between fur and scales. Its eyes were the worst things imaginable. The beast jumped again and tackled Griz to the ground. His armor and clothes singed and sizzled away at the touch of the beast. Once his sleeves were gone, his skin began to burn. Was this pain? Griz thought as he screamed. The pain was not there for long, for the beast was thrown off of Griz by two other shapes. One shape was light, white against the night sky, and the other had no light about him at all. It was almost as if he was not there. Both of the shapes struck the beast, and it fell down in an instant. Griz breathed heavily, reaching for a new pair of pants. "Did it burn those too, Griz?" An unfamiliar yet friendly voice asked with a hint of laughter. Griz chuckled and said, "After a wake-up like that one, who doesn't need a new pair of pants?" The three of them laughed, and Dark, the newcomer, kicked the beastly thing and jumped back. A dark liquid, possibly blood, left the body and spread. "What is that?" Griz asked. Light said, "This must be a lesser demon. Ones like this normally never leave the swamp regions." Dark shook his head. "Well, this one is clearly different." He thought for a second, his eyes widened. "There are no swamps on this continent. How did this beastly thing get here?" The three of them looked at each other. Griz mulled over the question, and said, "I don't think the portal that my master opened all those years ago was closed. What if this thing came from there?" Light nodded in agreement. Dark's already pale face whitened. They knew that if this demon had gotten here, there would be few other alternatives. The beast had to have come from the portal. The mood grew far gloomier. Griz said, "We should take care of the portal before we even consider heading towards the other provinces." The small party grew as they walked towards the town Griz's master had lived in. Arguaro, Seolea, and Snow-Eye joined them, telling Griz that if they were going to do anything else before sin destroyed the world, it might as well be fighting by Griz and Light's side. A few of the survivors had come to help as well, and the rest of the city's living people came to avoid the night creatures. The guards brought up the rear of the group. When Dark waved at the newcomers, Seolea looked as though she would faint. "Shade!" she screamed. "Shade!" Griz held her by the shoulder for a moment. Seolea calmed down as she always did at his touch. Griz explained, "This is Dark, son of Light. He is here to help us prevent any more beasts from exiting the portal, and, later, stop sin." Seolea stared in astonishment at Dark. Dark smiled, showing normal teeth, and brushed back his long black hair to reveal green, human-like eyes. Seolea threw back Dark's hair to reveal his ears, and she looked deep into his eyes. Dark blinked uncomfortably, and looked to Griz for help. Griz simply chuckled. "Okay, that's fine. You aren't a shade." Seolea turned and walked to Griz. "He is trustworthy." Griz nodded and said, "If he wasn't, then I would probably be dead by now." Seolea was a rarity amongst other humans. Light showed himself to no one beyond Griz, but Seolea could tell whenever he appeared or faded. She was also only the second person to actually behold Dark. Beyond Arguaro's strange comment hours ago about Dark, he did not seem to see him. Griz, Snow-Eye, and Seolea were the only ones who could see Dark. Snow-Eye continued to keep to herself. She was more interested in keeping the people safe. Most of the people spent the whole trip talking, but as for the fighters, they spent the entire trip in silence. Sooner, rather than later, everything grew worse. As the party approached the ruined town, monsters could be seen patrolling the outside. Most of the monsters patrolling turned towards the oncoming party. The party drew their weapons, ready to receive the beasts. Griz stared straight into the eyes of their opponents. The beasts were going to be merciless. "Be ready for the harshest fight of your lives, everyone." Griz charged forward, leading the onslaught. Griz's party, which was more like a small army at this point, knew their way forward held more worry than any path they had faced in the years before. The moment their weapons met, Griz could see that the monsters had the upper hand. Griz cut through the beast with a borrowed sword, making his way towards his old master's tower. Through a window, Griz could see the portal, blood red and glowing. The portal was completely out of control. Griz knew he must close it. Griz's thoughts trailed to the safety of those he was willing to die for. He glanced back at them and knew that this day would be their last. Griz was going to be the only survivor after this battle. Neither monster nor mortal would be left alive. Even Snow-Eye and Arguaro faced their doom. Griz wept for them all, but he was the only physical being there that could even attempt to close the portal. Once Griz had entered the ruined tower, he was face to face with a lesser demon, one far weaker than what had possessed him. The demon screamed in agony at Griz, turned tail, and ran towards the portal. Griz was far faster than the demon. He beat the demon to the portal and cut the demon down. The portal glowed and made several worrying noises, but nothing else came out. Griz surveyed the outside of the portal and could tell, not just from the portal but also from the open ceiling, that something larger than 2 houses had flown in. "Sin," Griz said simply. He stared into the bare red canvas that was the door to the house of evil and growled, "You cannot escape me. I will let you cool off in your hole, but once I am through saving this world, I will hunt you down." Griz yelled wordlessly towards the sky and called upon all of the magical essence that remained within him, and released it, aiming at the portal. The portal sizzled and cracked, tearing at the furniture and walls around them, and taking down the tower. It was shaking the earth and the people on it, closing ever so slightly. Griz watched as it inched closed, and turned towards the remaining beasts once it had closed for good. The battlefield had emptied. The monsters and people have died. It seemed as though everything had moved forward several months. Griz walked slowly towards the human bodies. Amongst the human remains lay the mangled corpses of Snow-Eye and Aguaro. Tears trailed down Griz's face. He feared this part of his insight before the battle. His sobs made every living being in the vicinity look at him. Animals, small and large, were all that remained alongside Griz. Light and Dark had left after the battle had been decided. Griz could hear them both now, standing not too far away and talking about how to help him. Griz let loose a long sigh, looking over at what must have been the remains of Seolea. For him, there was nothing left on this planet. However, he knew that the majority of the planet still remained, and they still needed him. He turned towards the new sun that had just barely hit the edge of the world. A new day calls for a new me. I must stay strong if I plan on protecting this world. Sin will return. He will endanger this planet, and I will have to bring him down. I will make you bow, Sin. I will make you bow before light, and tremble before me. Coming soon, Volume 2 of the Griz series, Sin's Puppeteer. I apologize for the childishness that reading may have had, but I made several experimental attempts in that volume alone. But I would say, as far as something made when I was like 16-ish, I'd say it's a pretty good start. I hope everyone who does get a chance to listen to this is ready for what is to come next. I'm still working hard